I interview retired four-star Marine Corps General John Allen. He's now the CEO of the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., one of the most respected think tanks of all. The topic, broadly speaking, is policy priorities for a changing America and a changing world. Sounds dry? It is not. We talked about much, much more than just that, including what he sees as the greatest risk to America now. Ladies and gentlemen, General John Allen. General John Allen assumed the presidency of the Brookings Institution in 2017, and before that, for nearly 4 decades, he held a variety of appointments in the U.S. military, including a four-star general rank, during which he did practically everything, from fighting ISIS and al-Qaeda to leading U.S. troops in the Afghanistan theater of war. After that, he became a diplomat holding very sensitive posts in the Obama administration. And today he gets to spend his time in a job that when we were speaking before, I described as the job I would love to have, because he gets to spend his time with very smart people talking about things that are extremely important and extremely timely in the United States. He knows all the players in diplomacy, international security, cyber warfare, intelligence, the military, and more. And we welcome General John Allen to join us today. General, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Tyler, it's great to be with you. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Let me begin without taking us down a rabbit hole of political discussion. You've been around Washington a long time. We've just had a change of administrations. Let me begin by asking you, how is Washington different today than it was a month ago?
Well, first, it's good to be with you, and I'm glad to contribute to this great forum that has such a great reputation for ideas and helping us to think about today and the future. I think there's, in many respects, and in many quarters of Washington today, there's a sense of relief. There is a sense that given the enormous challenges that the country faces today, that the current administration, the administration that was just inaugurated last month, is working very hard on behalf of the American people writ large on these major issues. And whether it's COVID or the struggling economy or issues associated with the racial and social reckoning that we had in 2020, or on the broader international front, in particular issues associated with climate and enhanced or a return to a commitment for multilateralism. There's a sense that it's very different in Washington now, and I think in most cases and in most quarters that seems to be a very positive change.
Yes. Let me ask you, for those who don't know about the Brookings Institution, give us a little bit about its history, what it does today, how it was founded, and the kinds of projects, research and otherwise, that you do right now to advance the cause.
Well, we take a responsibility to do good very seriously at the institution. It's probably the oldest continuously operating U.S. think tank, and very likely the oldest continuously operating think tank in the world. It was formed by a group of government reformers in 1916, well over 100 years ago, as the Institute of Economic Research and Government Research. There were two that were formed ultimately by the lead reformer, a fellow by the name of Robert S. Brookings. And he would also create a graduate school in his name. And around 1927, he formed all of these together into one entity called the Brookings Institution. He also founded Washington University in St. Louis. So we have a very strong partnership with that great institution there. So Brookings had as its earliest inclination, its earliest mission, if you will, economic research in the context of public policy. And the United States was emerging, and especially in the context of World War I and in the interwar years, it was emerging as a global player. And the capacity of the government itself to do policy research was quite limited. And these reformers saw this was a great opportunity. And so Robert S. Brookings and others began in the late 1910s and ultimately in the 20s to begin to form the capacity to do systematic, very serious systematic research. And it was, not surprisingly, mostly about economic matters. So the institution continued to operate, of course, at the end of the Spanish flu, across the Great Depression, across World War II. And in the aftermath of World War II, as we began to see this bipolar world emerge between the Soviets on one side and the West, led by the United States on the other, it became very clear that there was going to have to be an enormous geostrategic, geopolitical unity in our way going forward. And Brookings wrote the initial documents, the institution wrote the initial documents that would eventually become the Marshall Plan. And we're very proud of that. And it really shaped a capacity for a singular vision for how the future should look in the world amongst what would become the free world in the context of the Cold War. Brookings would go on to provide very important analysis to the Johnson administration on civil rights legislation. Some of the initial work by Brookings would eventually end up in the establishment of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. We've done a lot of very important work, and again, in the last few years, on issues associated with geopolitics. And so today, as Brookings got larger and ultimately had a greater breadth of public policy initiatives to embrace and imperatives to address, we became organized along 6 principal areas, 5 research programs and a major initiative: economic studies, governance studies, metropolitan policy studies, which focuses largely on American mid-sized cities, but we do work on the larger cities as well. The global economy and development, which is an outward-facing research program. And then finally, foreign policy, where we also do defense research. And I said there were 5 programs and an initiative. The initiative is artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, which is a new area of study for Brookings. But we're very, very proud of that work because, of course, AI and emerging technologies will define so much of global politics in the years going forward. And we're very proud this year in the University of Pennsylvania think tank rankings to be first among the think tanks on the work that we do about artificial intelligence.
Who do you work for, but who are the consumers of the work you produce, very quickly?
Well, we want to be universally applicable. So clearly, when I became president, clearly one of the things that we wanted to focus on was to help the president to govern, President of the United States to govern, and the Congress to legislate. And it's not about Donald Trump or the current Congress or the Congresses that we've seen in the last couple of years. It's about the president and his or her administration. It's about the Congress. So they are consumers of our public policy research. And as you might imagine, given the fact that 19 Brookings scholars have gone into the Biden administration, to include the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, the receptivity of this coming administration as it begins to get its legs up under it, the Biden administration, will be quite large to our work. But it's not just there. Those who need to consume policy recommendations or the reform of policy, they're not just in the administration and on Capitol Hill. We work with governors, we work with mayors, we work with advocacy organizations, national entities for education or national entities for child development. So we do a lot of work across a whole variety of areas, and our efforts are consumed by a wide variety of leaders who are engaged in public policy. Just this morning, I received an email from a very senior Afghan diplomat thanking us for some of the work that we have done on the Afghan peace policy and peace proposals going forward. So we're consumed around the world, but also in the United States as well.
I think there's a feeling in part because of what you just referred to, that a number of your scholars have moved into the Biden administration, that Brookings, it is often described maybe sort of ham-handedly in the media as a left-leaning or a liberal think tank. Is that a fair shot?
Truthfully, Tyler, I have no idea what those terms mean anymore, to be quite honest with you. If they want to describe us as that, because we stand for values, we stand for principles, we stand for human rights, we stand for the rule of law, free speech, and a free and independent media. You can call us whatever you want to. But we believe very, very strongly in the principles as developed by the Constitution. We have a very strong emphasis on social justice, and in particular, we are doing a great deal of work now on race, justice, and equity. So they can call us whatever they want to. The bottom line is what we produce is evidence-based, data-driven, public policy analysis that is intended to do good and ultimately to assist our government in doing good.
So as you look across the intersection of what's going on in the world and the challenges that the world and the United States faces right now, and you look at your work and your team of scholars, give us 1, 2, 3 areas of real focus and sort of critical importance as you see the world right now. What are the 3 things that the country and the world and Brookings need to focus on at this moment in time?
Sure, I'll give you 3 or 4, but I'll be brief. First is obviously supporting dealing with this pandemic. It has changed everything. The fact that you and I are not sitting in the same room is a function of the pandemic. It has changed so much, not just in the United States, but around the world. Second is, and the companion dimension of the pandemic is the tanking of the American economy. And what it has done, not just to the economy, what it's done to the third area that we're spending a lot of time on, and that is those vulnerable populations in the US society, the populations of color, the tribal populations, the indigenous population. So many of them have suffered enormously from this. So we're spending a great deal of time right now on all studying and recommending public policy approaches to all of the dimensions of how the pandemic has stricken the American people, but more broadly the global population. Then the economic implications, then the issues associated with social justice. But we're also very focused on the international dimension as well. In particular, with this administration's intent to pursue multilateralism, there's a great deal of work that we can do to support that. And Brookings as a platform has enormous credibility around the world. For example, just last Thursday, I chaired the US delegation, the Brookings delegation, in a bilateral conversation with very senior Chinese health officials, but some from the government as well, led by my counterpart, who's the president of Tsinghua University in Beijing, on how we move forward potentially as 2 countries in dealing with this issue associated with the pandemic. But we're also focused very heavily globally on issues of climate. So those are areas that we're touching all the time, and Brookings Institution is really focused on that.
Let's talk about where you see the United States right now in terms of the divisions that exist in the culture and the society, and get your take on it. President Biden has said that one of his goals is to heal some of the divisions that have manifested themselves in American society over the past few years, and they didn't just happen over the past 4 years. It's been a building kind of wave, I would say, if I can indulge in an opinion there. But how do you and the scholars at Brookings think about that? How do you get a hold on researching it and then publishing papers and scholarly conversation and indulging in scholarly conversations about it?
Well, it may be one of the great challenges we face as a country right now, the outcome of the election, not just in terms of the numbers who voted for the 2 principal presidential candidates, but the polarization that occurred around the election itself, with President Trump proclaiming right to the moment of the inauguration that it was stolen from him. This hardened a lot of the polarization that has existed in the country for a long time. But as you properly state, Tyler, this is not something that began with the Trump administration. It had been building for many, many years, and in some respects, it was a direct lineal descendant of the outcomes associated with the 2008 economic, the Great Recession, the economic downturn, and our inability really as a nation to address all of the outcomes of that. And so while there are very serious social divisions within our society, many of those can be defined by the economic situation in large segments of the population. Because there has been and continues to be, and my hope is that we'll resolve it starting relatively soon, these major divisions of equality in our society, whether it's in the context of our Black or our brown populations, whether it's the tribal populations or inequality associated with gender, all of those things exacerbated by major economic challenges and the failure of globalization to deliver on the promises of many of the political elites over the last several years, and a sense increasingly by that segment of our population, the white element of the population that has been disenfranchised often by the downturn in American manufacturing and jobs going overseas, the sense of dissatisfaction over their economic straits, the sense of abandonment by American political leadership, that has all combined over a period of years now to create tensions and divisions in our country, which were slow in the building, but have created enormous challenges just in solving the issue of COVID, the politicization of the solutions to COVID, whether you wear a mask or not, whether you get the vaccine or not. It has echoes in the challenges we have within our society. So there's a lot of work to be done. It can't come from Washington. It's got to be assisted from Washington. Stimulus packages, et cetera, are helpful. But just as these issues were long in the building at the societal levels in cities and in counties and in states, it is there that we have to rely on leaders of goodwill and bipartisanship and an intent to govern at the grassroots level to lead us out of this. And Washington can do just so much. But what we want to do at Brookings is to appeal to the grassroots level to begin to heal these divides economically and socially, especially on the issues of equality as we go forward. If we don't do that, we have no hope of ever solving these rifts and healing as a people.
Are there sufficient leaders of the kind of goodwill that you say is critical to bridging the divides? Are there sufficient leaders on both sides of the aisle, as the saying goes, to do that?
Well, if you only watch the media right now, you would be exposed, I think, to the sense of irreconcilability politically at the national level. And we've been here before. We've had very, very difficult moments in our history where it seemed very difficult for the one party to speak with the other. But one of the points that I tried to make a moment ago, which is that so much of the healing has to occur at the local level, it almost makes no difference what party you're from. The challenges in my county or the challenges in your county or the challenges in your small town often completely defy political orientation. And it's there where leaders of goodwill that have to live with those problems every single day really offer us, I think, the greatest hope to bring people to the table, regardless of their political persuasion, and begin to try to solve these issues. The first thing we have to do is try to restore respect. That respect has been lost in so many ways around the country. And sadly, the last 4 years in particular has driven a sense that if we have a difference of opinion, we start the conversation from being enemies. We've got to stop that. We've got to be able to have the conversation over difficult matters that comes from a place of respect and is operationalized through the tool of civility. And often, as we saw on the 6th of January, the loss of civility has its most extreme operationalization in the kinds of mob mentality and mob activity that we saw that day. So it's got to start with respect. It's got to be operationalized through civility, and it can't only come from Washington. Washington can point to it. Washington can try to set the conditions ultimately for a national dialogue, but that dialogue has got to be held at the state, county, and municipal levels, at the local levels in this country. And it's going to take a long time. It won't happen tomorrow.
I want to move on to international things with which you're so familiar, but I was just struck by something you said a moment ago, and that is, if you had asked me 3 years ago or 2 years ago, what could possibly bring the country together and unite the factions on the wings, I would have said some sort of national emergency, a war maybe, something like that. Well, we had a national emergency. We're in the middle of a national emergency in this pandemic, and it has done very little to unite the country. In fact, I think you just made the point that it's divided us. It's become politicized in a way that was perhaps unforeseeable, or maybe it was foreseeable. But be that as it may, it seems to have added to the divisions in the society rather than brought the two sides together. Let's take a global look now. Since you spent parts of your Marine career fighting ISIS, combating Al-Qaeda, are those two threats, have they been mitigated and put in a box, or do they still exist? Are they still a risk to the United States and to global security?
No, they're still out there, and they're quite lethal, and we should be very attentive to them. The challenges that we have from Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, what the Arabs call Daesh, from separatist jihadist elements that may be coming out of Kashmir that are now even more radicalized than they were before, we should be very attentive to them. One of the challenges has been with the United States having stepped back over the last 4 years. Much of the leadership that we would otherwise have exerted in the context of coalition approaches to dealing with these threats, much of that leadership disappeared, number one. And number two, many of the countries themselves, because of the nature of the disease, of the pandemic, were forced to look inward and have to expend a lot of their resources simply to get control of their public health situation. So in many respects, while we have pushed back hard on Al-Qaeda around the world, we pushed back very hard on the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The Islamic State still exists in some fairly virulent franchises around the world. And these strains of jihadi terrorist elements and insurgencies, they still exist in the world. We should be very attentive to them. My guess will be that under this administration, with this national security advisor, with this new director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, with Lloyd Austin at Defense, you'll see us paying a lot more attention to them in the context of the kinds of coalitions that will be necessary, both to preserve the stability of our allies, but also to begin to deal with the long-term causal factors within those societies that create such a large radicalization. And Tyler, let me make one quick point to your last comment about COVID. COVID was a national crisis. COVID is the enemy. But the challenge was, as COVID exploded on the national scene, the President of the United States never treated it as the enemy. The President of the United States treated it as an opportunity for him to make political capital vis-a-vis his own intentions with respect to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. No war we have ever fought with the enemy did we find ourselves taking a position one way or the other about the enemy inside the United States body politic. And that's what we did. And it's so confused the American people that we've been unable to put together the kind of unified, coherent national approach to this that would have typified an American approach to an external enemy attacking the United States and killing 450,000 Americans.
As you look at the world today, what is the greatest, or it can be a non-state actor like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of several other groups, or a state actor? Who poses, or what poses the greatest security threat to the United States, or economic threat to the United States? China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, what?
Climate. I believe climate is the greatest long-term threat to the viability of the United States and many other countries like ourselves over the long term. We have to be able to see to what I call the deep horizon. That's as much as a generation or more into the future. And we spend a lot of time at Brookings looking out to 50 years, 2070. What will the world look like just from climate in 2070? And there are security threats that we deal with. We call it the 4+1 formulation with China and Russia, Iran and North Korea. And the +1 is what I just described a moment ago, the strain of jihadist terrorist insurgency that we're going to have to deal with. Those are immediate security matters that we have to deal with. But there are other kinds of, if you will, functional security matters that we really have to be attentive to. The first is nuclear proliferation. The non-proliferation capacity has been dramatically weakened in the world over the last 10, 15, 20 years or so. The second is biological terrorism. You know, we're suffering right now one of the worst attacks that we have in 100 years from a biological agent, if you will, the COVID-19 pandemic. So the whole issue associated with the biological challenges, whether it's intentional or whether it's not in the context of the weaponization of biotechnology, is a real challenge for us going forward. The third is climate. Climate has economic, it has societal, it has biological challenges associated with it. It has real physical challenges with changes in weather patterns and sea level rise and the warming of the seas. These things will cost us tens of trillions of dollars against the global economy over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And we've got to take the steps necessary now as a global community to begin to deal with that, or it will exacerbate so many of the other problems we have. And frankly, when conservative estimates of 150 million climate migrants between now and 2070 are put on the table, when you remember that just 2 million Syrian conflict migrants dramatically change, just 2 million dramatically change the politics of Europe in so many ways. Just imagine what 10% of 150 million climate migrants going to Europe, because there are large areas of Africa, for example, that become climatologically untenable. Imagine what that will do. So while we have security threats in the traditional sense of how we use the term security threat, potentially Russia, China, the Iranians and the Koreans, North Koreans, we have real environmental and planet security threats that we have to be thinking about out to 50 years. And if we don't deal with those threats at the deep horizon while we're dealing with the physical security threats up close, and we do them together, we're in a very serious situation about 2070.
Before we wrap up, and I have to be mindful of time, I could spend the whole day talking to you. You mentioned at the top of our segment the initiative that you guys have in artificial intelligence. I'm going to ask you a question that bears on artificial intelligence, but maybe sort of tangentially, and it is this: how ready is the United States, both private enterprise and the government, for cyber warfare and malicious attacks on the cyber infrastructure, the internet infrastructure that now is so critical to the functioning of the economy?
Yeah, we're very vulnerable still, and we're going to have to continue to work in every way we possibly can. Artificial intelligence offers us a potential solution. The cognitive defenses that artificial intelligence can bring to the Internet of Things to create both protection and stability for our existence on the backbone of the Internet. That defines our world today. The cyber environment, in fact, in the context of security, the cyber environment in many respects is becoming the decisive environment within which conflict can be waged. And while we'll still find ourselves having to deal with conflict in the physical environment, the cyber environment is one that will be with us for a very long time. And our vulnerabilities, the inherent vulnerabilities that come from being a free and open society on an internet where we want the traffic of ideas to make us better and stronger, that also is a vulnerability. And we don't want to have to shut down the internet. We don't want to have to shut down components of the internet. We have to be able to defend ourselves. And as I think you know, we are reeling right now under, once again, another Russian-based intrusion into our internet and into a whole number of our government agencies and into the private sector as well. And so it's a continued trumpet call, if you will, for us to continue the process of improving our cybersecurity as the cyber domain becomes even more prominent in the American way of life.
Final question. We've talked a lot about threats. We've talked a lot about risks. We've talked a lot about divisiveness in our society and injustice. The final question is, I think, a simple one, but a very hard one to answer. Are you optimistic about the United States and the fate of the world? And if so, why?
I am optimistic, actually. I'm pragmatic about the challenges that we face and how some of those could go very badly, very quickly. But I am optimistic with this administration, with the leadership that we now see, with, I think, people having been brought right to the edge on the 6th of January of seeing just how bad this can be, with the social reckoning that we have seen over the summer of 2020. While it has pointed out that we have enormous challenges, not just domestically, but enormous challenges around the world, I do believe that we have seen us moving with real deliberation and very serious consideration with respect to how we do better domestically and how we in a multilateral sense can do better on behalf of the global population, whether it's about the disease or economic recovery or multilateral approaches to the great challenges of climate. I am optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic at the moment, but I am optimistic. I'm inherently an optimist by birth, but I also see that there is genuine reason for optimism now, and I'm going to continue to embrace that as we think pragmatically about the kinds of public policy research we can do and undertake, not just to improve the capacity of this government to be effective, but also the community of nations also.
General Allen, thank you so much for your time today and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Tyler. Thank you very much.
Thank you.